Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. The previews roll on as we close in on the start of the season. Joining us today with his thoughts on this Michigan team and more is former Wolverine great and now BTN analyst Jake Butt. Jim had a Monday presser and was pretty darned upbeat, as you might expect. He talked about how good JJ has been, raved about his running backs and offensive line, and said the defense, especially the D-line, has been outstanding. He even mentioned we could see Alex Orji returning kicks, and he might be one of the greatest returners of all time. And I know a lot of people were rolling their eyes at that, but, it's that time of the year. And I know we haven't played it down yet, but Jim was sure singing his team's praises, and it was at least fun to listen to. BTN was at practice on Monday, and they were very impressed with what they saw. Jerry DiNardo said it was the most physical practice the crew had seen so far, and granted, they've only been at 9 practices, but it included a lot of live tackling, which he said surprised him. My guest today was also there, and he agreed with Jerry's assessment. Jake said you can close your eyes and hear good football. Players communicating, the pads cracking, and that's what he heard. Up next is Michigan great and now BTN analyst Jake Butt. So stay with us. Here with us on our game day segment of the show this week as we continue with the previews is Michigan great and now BTN analyst Jake Butt. Great to have you with us, Jake.
Yeah, guys, great to be with you. The Michigan Man Podcast. Coach Harbaugh used to tell us that's one of the best compliments you could ever get is to be called a Michigan man. So excited to be with you guys today.
Well, it's great to have you with us. I know you're a busy guy with your role there at BTN. As we tape on Wednesday morning, you're in West Lafayette to watch the Boilers practice, right?
Yeah, it's been that's how we know the season's here. I was in Chicago this weekend for a wedding. I drove to Ann Arbor to be with the network. We watched them Michigan practice on Monday. So I drove in, watched them practice, drove back Monday night, got in about 2 in the morning, had another event to do yesterday, and now I'm driving in and out to West Lafayette today because I got something to do later tonight. So all the travel's telling me and watching all these practices is the season is right here. It's right around the corner.
When I do the previews with the beat writers from week to week, when you start in late July into August, you get to a point where you say, okay, enough of the previews. Let's tee it up, and finally, it's not that far away.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we're looking forward to that for sure.
Well, huge expectations for this Michigan team, Jake, as we all know. And right now, if there's kind of a cloud hanging over things, it's this darn NCAA investigation that just keeps taking some strange turns. What's your take on that whole deal?
To me, I can't predict the future. I don't know what's going to happen, but my take on it is with Coach Harbaugh, the situation with Coach Harbaugh, and then if you follow broader storylines in college football, there's been other news that's come out where the NCAA has denied immediate eligibility to a few transfers that, look, we're in the world of transfer portal. I can't believe they're denying any eligibility, but guys that were transferring to be closer to family for medical issues. So a situation the NCAA should not be involved in at all. I say that to say this. It feels to me that the NCAA, a good analogy would be a wounded animal in the wild on its last leg. And they're sitting there just lashing out just one last final time because they believe their clock is ticking. And why I don't like that is I've been outspoken about the NCAA since I was in college as a player. There's been plenty of opportunities for the NCAA to get ahead of issues. But because of their own egos or whatever it might be, they just said, oh, well, NIL isn't going to happen. Oh, well, the transfer portal isn't going to happen. Oh, well, the conferences won't expand. And because of that, now they're behind issues, and now they point fingers. To me, that's not leadership. Leadership considers all the options. They get ahead of it, and they're prepared no matter what direction things go. So when I see the NCAA acting the way they are right now, it's frustrating to say the least.
No, absolutely. I think we're all at the point where at least we know Jim's going to be on the sidelines during the season, and whatever happens after that, we'll let it happen. Well, we have the season right
Yeah.
in front of us, and we're just so amped up about that. Let's talk about this team, starting with the offense and the straw that stirs the drink, J.J. McCarthy. I mean, you've been in the NFL. You've played with and against some pretty darn good quarterbacks. How good do you think this kid can be?
I think it could be really special. I think we've seen it at times. We've seen pockets where it's been asked of JJ to be special. I think it's his first ever touchdown in the big house. I think they're playing Western Michigan where, he rolls out right outside of the pocket and then throws a 60-yard bomb all the way across the field, which is a no-no for a touchdown. It's a no-no for most quarterbacks. You don't do that. But if you're special, you can do it like JJ. I go even to the TCU game the second half. It wasn't a perfect game by JJ standards, but Michigan found themselves in a position where they couldn't just run the ball, and they had to lean on JJ's playmaking ability. And we got glimpses of who he can be. The biggest limiting factor for JJ is the fact that Michigan has such a great offensive line and such a great running back room and running game that they can run the ball 30, 40 times a game and sleepwalk to 10 victories. It limits the opportunities for JJ to go prove his full talent. So with that in mind, I think he's got all the potential in the world. I watched practice the other day. I said a great indicator for a quarterback is the game looked like it slowed down for him. It looked a lot more comfortable. He wasn't just getting from his first and second read. He was getting all the way back to his third and fourth read. I think that's a good indicator of his comfortability with the offense and where he's at as a quarterback.
Well, you just mentioned that, hey, with this offensive line, the running back room, you really could go through the first 10 games, I should say, and run the football. But, it sounds like in practice early, they've been working on the throwing game. And what about this group of wideouts? Because if you look at a lot of the preseason magazines, listen to even people like Joel Klatt, they'll bring up that wide receiver room and say, oh, I don't know. But do you think they're underrated as far as their potential this year?
I think we're all underrated as far as potential goes, right? I mean, we all have a potential that we're working towards. So, but underrated, no. I think to say that this group has potential is fair, but to say we haven't seen the full potential consistently is also fair. At times we've seen Cornelius Johnson make big-time plays, but then at times he's been quiet. We've seen Roman Wilson prove himself. Now, he's dealt with some injuries right in the middle of the season, the past 2 seasons. That's limited his capability. So I think it's fair. When I look at this receiver group, I just want to see someone separate. Who's going to be the guy where it's 3rd and 6, 3rd and 7 in the fourth quarter against Penn State, Ohio State, in the Big Ten championship, in the playoffs? Who's going to be the guy that JJ is saying, hey, I'm going to this guy no matter what, right? And I trust that he's going to win. I just want to see someone separate. I think they have good receivers, but the question is who can be great? Who can be even better than great at times? And in a similar situation to what we said with JJ, will Sharon Moore and this offense allow the passing game to showcase their potential, or are they going to be comfortable running the ball? And that's to be seen this fall.
I've got to ask you about one of the young men at your old position at tight end. How good can Colston Loveland be? Because for a freshman, I know he started playing more at the end of the season, but wow, does he look good?
I think he can be really, really special. And, I look at his timeline and I look at where I was. I watched practice. For me, we had very comparable freshman years. And then going into my sophomore year, I tore my ACL. So I did miss most of that offseason. So my breakout year was my junior season. And I something clicked for me going into that offseason. I was at practice the other day, and it looks like it's already clicked for Colston. He was one of JJ's favorite targets out there. So I think he's ready to take that quantum leap forward this year, and it applies perfectly when we're talking about the receiver room. Who's going to be JJ's go-to target? Maybe it's Colston Loveland. Maybe it's coming out of the tight end room. You go back to Jim Harbaugh's days at Stanford even, and he's coached some great ones. Zach Ertz, right? We could go all the way down the list. And oftentimes it's come from the tight end room that has been the primary target in the offense. So I think Colston's ready to have an all-conference season and compete for, a Big Ten Tight End of the Year award and national award.
And I know they say he's really beefed up, put on some weight too.
Yeah, he looks solid. I mean, he looks like he's ready. I mean, look, that's the nature of these high school guys these days. All the training, everything that we learned, and I kind of lived through the change of this. But it used to be you had to get to college to get the proper training, and there was maybe a handful of kids that came in that were college ready. But nowadays, these kids are training when they're really, really young, so they have a foundation. I mean, Colston looks like an NFL tight end already. He's about 250 pounds. He looks solid. His legs look thick, and it's going to help him, particularly in the blocking game.
Well, there are no questions about our running back room. If Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards aren't the best duo in the country, they're right up there, because there aren't too many teams that have surefire NFL guys they can split carries with, are there?
Oh, yeah. When I talked to Coach Harbaugh about, listen, I don't think it's a mystery to say that the best running back room in the country is here in Ann Arbor between those two guys. The question is how can they elevate? And I actually wonder, maybe it's less about them elevating. They're both injured. Blake's coming off an injury. Donovan's coming off some injuries. Maybe we don't need them to statistically elevate. Maybe what we need is to, and I'm speaking when I say we, Coach Harbaugh and these two guys, maybe what they need is to stay healthy. And maybe what that means is less explosive stats, but more longevity throughout the season and having them both available down the stretch. We know what they're capable of. We see it on film. So clearly either one of those guys as individuals could be the best players at their position. But as a collective group, they can help each other stay fresh. And then you go down to the third, fourth, fifth spots. Those guys will need to step up to keep Donovan and Blake fresh if Michigan wants to make a run at the national title.
Well, do you think we'll see Donovan and Blake on the field together more often this year?
I hope so. I hope so. As a football fan and as an analyst, I think Donovan, if he wanted to, I've watched him do it at times. If he wanted to, he could probably be one of the best slot receivers in the Big Ten Conference. He's got that type of ability to him. He catches the ball really, really naturally. Most running backs are body catchers. They're kind of scared to attack the ball with their hands. Donovan doesn't. He catches the ball better than a lot of receivers I see. And then there's a little art and fluidity and nuance to being a good route runner and setting it up. And with that in mind, football is a game of matchups. You think your receiver is going to be your best target. Well, a receiver on a cornerback may not be as good of a matchup as a running back on a linebacker. And then you factor in that Donovan Edwards is really a slot receiver. He's got that type of ability lining up against the linebacker. That is a matchup I would attack all day long if I was Michigan's offense.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting to see. You know better than most, it all starts up in the trenches. And not only is this offensive line group very talented, but they're deep. Jim was talking about it yesterday at his presser. Easily 10 deep, so many battles going on there. It really is safe to say this is an elite group, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I made the case that I look at their second unit, their second starting five, and I call them a second starting five because I believe those guys as five individuals playing as one offensive line unit under Sharon Moore would probably be a better collective group than, half of the country. They got that level of talent, that level of experience, and they obviously have one of the best offensive line coaches in the country in Sharon Moore. So they have an embarrassment of riches there, and of course that matters even more so when you consider the identity in Ann Arbor of wanting to run the football and establish physicality and tenacity up front.
Well, let's talk about that defense for a few minutes, Jake. Jesse Minter has a very talented group again, and they have potential. There's that potential word again to be, I think, as good as last year, maybe even better.
Yeah, no, definitely. And we've seen the progression, right? I know it was Mike McDonald a few years ago to now Jesse Minter and Jesse Minter again year two. They all come from that same Ravens scheme. So this is really year three in the system. But with McDonald, it looked a little bit different because you had Aiden Hutchinson and Ojabo coming off the edge. You didn't need to blitz as much. Whereas Minter got much more into his blitz packages last year, got a lot more aggressive in terms of his play calling. I think this year you may see a little bit more of a balance with some of the edge rushers. You brought in Josiah Stewart, Derek Moore's a year older, maybe Braden McGregor, Jalen Harrell, those guys stepping up. So it could be the best in the sense that it might be the biggest blend between what we've seen in the past 2 years. So they're loaded. Chris Jenkins. Really, really excited to see him play. Looks like he's next in line in a long list of great defensive linemen that Jim Harbaugh has developed. And excited to see it. And really think the roster top to bottom is ready to make another run at it. And if there was a year, I think they got a good chance this year to get over the hump. If they do make it to the playoffs, this roster is built to make a run at a national championship.
Well, if you have concerns about this team, and I know you just saw them practice earlier this week, on either side of the ball, what would you say some of those concerns are?
Yeah, so I would really just look at the cornerback position, and I know they went in and they got I'm drawing a blank on his name, but they got the guy from Boston College to help out Mike Sainristil and Will Johnson. So the third cornerback spot, though, again, we're talking about the third cornerback spot. That's a good place to be, and Michigan has other guys out there that they're confident in. And then the receiver position really is again, they're good guys. The receivers are sound and solid, but there's going to come a point in time where you're going to have to just put the ball up in the air and have someone come down with it. And I believe any of those guys, Roman Wilson, Cornelius Johnson, are capable of doing it. But can you do it consistently enough to prove yourself as the go-to guy? That's going to be the challenge.
Well, looking at the season, we know that, and you know very well, you've got to be ready to go every Saturday. Doesn't matter who you're playing. But if this team plays like we think it can right out of the gate, who do you see on that schedule being the first big test for us?
Well, listen, you can look at the first. We can start with the out-of-conference schedule and the way it sets up. This team is extremely experienced. So the way the first really 4 games into Rutgers set up, the team's going to be able to establish an identity and know who they are. With that in mind, then you kind of get into the meat of the schedule. I have no idea where Nebraska is going to be at this year, but I think that they can always be challenging, especially on the road. Matt Rule's a good coach. Minnesota is a team where, again, they're replacing some pieces. They have potential. Maybe they're a challenge. You know, Michigan State is always a challenge from a rivalry standpoint. But to me, the real challenge is Michigan should be favored and should win in all those games up until they play on the road at Penn State. And the Penn State roster is loaded. I've done a deep dive on it. I think the 3 teams in the East are all right neck and neck. Michigan with the slight edge above Penn State and Ohio State. But Penn State is loaded. They are going to challenge Michigan. The fact that it's at home, it's going to be hard to run against those guys. I know they're going to have a sour taste in their mouth from what Blake and Donovan did to them last year, running for 400 yards. So I think Penn State will be a big challenge, and we'll find out a lot about Michigan leading up to that game, but we'll really find out about how good they can be in that game on the road in Beaver Stadium.
You were at practice last week, just the other day, actually. And I heard Jerry DiNardo say that I think it's 9 practices the Caravan has hit so far. He said that this was the most physical he had seen any practice, offense and defense. Do you agree with that?
I haven't been with them to any other practices, so I don't have the context and the ability to speak on that as a fact. But I will say this, it was physical. And I told Coach Harbaugh this after practice. I said, hey, you can tell good football if you close your eyes. It starts with pre-snap, you hear the communication, and then it's the post-snap, the pads cracking and the guys straining. You can hear the strain when you close your eyes. So they did a live goal line drill. That certainly lends to the ability to showcase your physicality. So I can tell you this, it was a physical day.
Well, final question before we let you get away, Jake. When we look at this season, how sweet would it be and how much would it mean to Michigan football, the program, to make it 3 in a row over Ohio State and have it be in the Big House in November?
Well, I think trends matter, and our trends affect our perception. They affect the internal perception within the program. So, you know, you can go back to when Aiden Hutchinson and Hassan Haskins and Cade McNamara, those guys beat Ohio State at home in a game. Everyone picked Ohio State. But what did we say that offseason? What do we hear that offseason? Was, hey, listen, you did it once. In order for it to be a thing, you got to do it again. And, in fact, you got to do it down in Columbus. Well, they did it down in Columbus. And maybe in some ways did it even in even a more dominating fashion. So now to do it 3 in a row, now all of a sudden there should be no mystery. There's very few mystery these days. I know a lot of people are still liking Ohio State, but for the past decade before that, the easy pick in the Big Ten Conference was Ohio State because Michigan hadn't beat them. if you do it 3 in a row, now you're setting the precedent for the next decade plus to say, hey, this is who Michigan is. This is who they will be. This is who they are. And Ohio State then is sitting in the passenger seat and has to go out to be the one to prove it. So that's the opportunity that's at stake here.
Well, our guest today has been Michigan great and now BTN analyst Jake Butt. And Jake, it's been great having you on the show for the first time. I know you're busy in West Lafayette watching the Boilers today, but we look forward to seeing you a lot on BTN this season. I know you already are, so keep up the great work, and we look forward to another visit in the future. Go Blue.
Go Blue. Thanks.
On Quick Hits today, we're getting more coach and player media stuff now, and everything is very positive. The one thing we listen for are injury updates. Usually, we don't get many. Jim mentioned that Amorian Walker was working through a nagging injury, but they hope to have him back soon. Hopefully, we get through the next 2 weeks without losing any key players, so knock on wood. We'll be back next week with our last preview show of the preseason. Hallelujah. In 2 weeks, we'll be ready to tee it up and get the show on the road for real. It can't come soon enough. I know most of you feel that way too. So that does it for another week. Make sure you tell your Wolverine family and friends about the show and join us again next week. I also invite you to like us on Twitter, follow on Facebook, and please share a comment or review wherever you get your podcast from. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Until we meet again, take care, and as always, go Blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V-Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!